Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Fafo-breakfast seminar on this current situation in Egypt. My name is Per Norheim Martinsen, and I am a research director here at Fafo. This is a joint event between Fafo and the UNDP Oslo Governance Center, and I would like to invite Marko Pavlovic to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of UNDP Oslo Governance Center, I would like to welcome you also to this UNDP Fafo-breakfast seminar, and to send apologies from our director, Hebel Kohli, who was unable to attend because she is currently in Egypt, and due to personal reasons, she was not able to join us today. We are very pleased to start our new fellowship program with Fafo, and we look forward to very grateful for the support so far, and look forward to continuing cooperation together in terms of fostering exchange of knowledge and partnership, and also in terms of exchanging the expertise on issues related to the democratic governance. Please let me also introduce our first fellow, Dr. Shahehan Bouyan, who is a scholar and associate at the American University of Cairo. And Dr. Shahehan carried out the research on the trends of governance issues in Egypt, specifically focusing on the period after the first popular revolution in the country 2 years ago. As we are witnessing the events that are unfolding in Egypt with the emergency state that actually was imposed yesterday, I believe that the presentation will serve as a food for thought to get a little bit more understanding about what is happening in Egypt, and also to maybe provide hopefully some answers what would be the possible solutions or the way forward. In this regard, UNDP Oslo Governance Center stays committed to actually support the work in transitions, which is one of our main areas of work. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Then I shall not take up much more time, rather than just say a few words of administration. We are being filmed today, and this will go on Fafo TV, so those who are not here can watch that, and others who would like to see what have been said later on, they can also log on to Fafo to have a look at this. This means that whenever you want to say something, please wait for the microphone and speak clearly into it. Also, mobile phones, please turn it off so it doesn't interfere with the broadcast. Okay, we'll just do the introductions of the different speakers. Shahehan, who have already been duly introduced, will start. And then the other people we have with us today to discuss these issues is Professor Bjørn Olav Utvik at the University of Oslo. We have Mona Abdel-Fadil and Jakob Høygild, who are both Fafo researchers. But now I give the floor to Dr. Shahehan, please.
Good morning, everyone. So, okay, as you see, the title of this seminar is Defining Egypt. As you see, the title of my presentation is Political Inclusion, Exclusion in the context of democratic governance. I think it would be appropriate just to say who defines governance. So in a functional state, it should be the citizen or the power of the citizen. They define governance, and why they define governance and how they define governance. They define governance in order to make the state functional so that these services, goods and services are delivered on time, and the institutions, they will provide the goods and services, they can be put under control, so or accountable, make them transparent and accountable. So this is why when we are talking about the democratic governance, the definition that is actually put forward from the UNDP, it says, this is referred to a process of transforming a country's governance system to a transparent, accountable, capable of improving the quality of human life. So all the aspects, all the issues, all the things that would be done, the human quality of the improvement of the quality of human life is the center point. And there are three, as you see, there are three key pillars of the democratic governance. That is inclusive participation. This is how you are engaging yourself, or the state is influencing, or the state is creating a condition so that you can involve yourself with the process, with the political process. That political process is your right to political participation and participation in the public sphere. And I'll be basically focusing on that one, as this is the key topic at this point of time. And then, as I said, the responsive institution, how to make the state responsible. There are institutions, as I said, service delivery. Service delivery is one of the key issues. That is the key function of any public administration. So public administration task is to provide goods and services. How effectively and efficiently they can provide is a big question that depends on the capacity of the state. And this is why, in order to make a state accountable, there are some international practices, for example, the anti-corruption measures. And now, in the context of Egypt, especially the post-revolution one, as you know, when we are talking about the political participation, the things that comes, the political parties. And in the political parties law, that was the law 40 of 1977, has been amended in the 2011. So the 77 law, that very clearly said that all Egyptians has the right to participate, to form the political party and to participate in the political life. But when you are going to implement that one can find a series of impediments in order to achieve that one. And one of them was this PPSC, Political Parties Affairs Committee. That committee, the composition of the committee was very difficult one. So the chair of the Shura Council, he was the head of that committee. Then that the notorious Minister of Interior, he was one of the members of that committee. And then other people from the National Democratic Party, which is now banned, that the rank and file stalwarts of NDP, they are the members of that particular committee. So whenever you are submitting an application, if you are no one from their side, your application is turned down, and that particular decision is a binding decision. So this is why there are domestic multi-party practices during the Mubarak regime or during the President Sadat regime that continued until the end of 2011. And in the 2011, Article 8 has been amended. That brought two specific issues: the change in composition of PPSC, and now it is composed of the independent judges, and the formation of a party is based on a notice given by the new party to PPSC. So when they receive a notification about the formation of a committee, you can start working. They look at your documentation. If there is any problem, they will work that one with the Supreme Council of Supreme Court, and then they will, if there is anything adverse, they will let you know about your status of your application. So that is a huge change in the context of Egyptian state. And this is why, as you have probably noticed, that before 2011 parliamentary election, there are more than 40 new political parties emerged. And Article 18 has already been repealed, because Article 18 of the Law 40 of 1977, that provided government subsidy to parties. It means that you are buying the weak political parties in order to work for the government, in order to work for the NDP. So this was one of another achievement of the revolution, that the SCAF, Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, who are in charge after the Mubarak ouster for 18 months, they repealed that policy. The second one, relating to inclusive participation, is electoral politics or the competitive electoral politics. So as I said, competitive electoral politics, theoretically, that was there. But people, they knew that what is going to be happen. This is why they are not that interested in going to the booth. So the voter turnout rate was always quite low. But that was probably for the first time in the electoral history of Egypt that the turnout rate was huge. And more than 27 political parties participated in the electoral process. And the election was free and fair. And this is how you saw both in the Shura Council as well as in the People's Assembly, the Muslim Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party got a majority. And then the issue of the civil society. So civil society is the core of any democratic activities in the modern state. And historically, civil society has a big role in the Egyptian society. So what has happened now, and the law 84 of 2002, that has given the government a huge discretion that government can ask any non-governmental organization to tell them about their funding resources. And so far, I think still, the government is very much suspicious about the activities of the NGOs and the community-based organizations. This is one of the reasons that even President Morsi, before he was elected, he said that he would be probably making an amendment of this law to make it more user-friendly, but ultimately he did not do it. I'm not focusing that much on that one. You know what's happened in June 30 that brought President Morsi out of the power. And when we're talking about the political exclusion, it is eventually the Muslim Brotherhood is excluded. And that is to some extent by choice, but the people who are in power right now, we have not seen that they have created any specific condition where probably this Muslim Brotherhood or their leaders can participate and make the electoral system or can come to a particular conclusion. So you saw the sectarian violence is rising and uneasy relationship with the military and the MB. So what has happened yesterday that made me just to add something here. So some possible scenarios after August 14. One, not in any particular order, continue to torture and harass the MB leaders and supported to make them weak, feeble, frustrated, and disorganized. This will escalate the violence further and will ruin the economy, prospect of employment generation, and public life, as we all understand that one. Second one may be a more positive one. All stakeholders will understand the price of the violence and will give the concession to each other, will reach to a compromise to end the impasse. And it is mostly highly unlikely that that will soon happen. And third scenario, if the senior MB leadership goes for negotiation compromise, this may upset the young brothers who may possibly misunderstand the leadership, and the young may choose to leave the MB and can engage revengeful jihad activities. I don't want to say in the very early morning that that will probably be the case, but that can probably turn to any way. So let me stop here. Time is finished. Thank you very much for your attention.
I would have said good morning, but after the events of yesterday, I won't. I'll talk, I gave the title, I think, Revolution 2.0 or Revolution in Reverse. there are many things to discuss about Egypt today. One of them is whether the Muslim Brothers is good or bad for Egypt, or has a good policy. There are obviously a lot to be said about that. Let me be clear about that. There are many negative points about the actions of the Muslim Brothers. They are a strictly hierarchical organization that makes it both internal democracy difficult, and not least dealing with others. So they have, to the extent that they have ruled, which is only partial, we must remind ourselves, they have had a style which is go it alone. It is paternalistic towards others. You know, we know best. And also they have not had, or at least they have not exhibited, a very clear plan for reform. Not least there has been a lack of reform of the military, the police and the judiciary. And also the Muslim Brothers have been prone to sectarianism, especially in periods when they have been pressured hard. But that's one discussion. There's another discussion which is very interesting, is faced with a military coup, what options did the Muslim Brothers have? How have they acted? How wise have their decisions been in this period? That's also a separate discussion. What I want to discuss now, and I'm willing to come back to these things in later on, but what I want to discuss now is how to understand the basic lines of what has happened for the last month. There is a saying in English, say, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, if it swims like a duck, most probably it is some kind of a duck. So this discussion whether this was a military coup that took place on the 3rd of July, I think should be over by now. It is a military coup. I think it's also more and more getting clear that it's a revolution in reverse, but I'll get back to that towards the end. It's a military coup. It's based on the gun, on the power of the gun. It has been characterized by the arrests of leading politicians from the party that has consistently got the most votes in elections. It is, as we see now unfolding, a bloody suppression with firing live ammunition at demonstrators. It is also, the day before yesterday, there was a change of governors in many of the governorates of Egypt, and who got into positions were retired generals. It was a reversal to the practice under Mubarak, where the police generals and army generals would be the governors. It is this, and actually there's one important continuation from the rule of Morsi. It is the same Minister of Interior who was, during the Morsi period, harshly criticized by those who were then in opposition for the brutal repression of demonstrations. He was one of the few that were allowed to go on being the Minister of Interior during the new regime. Some background then. Now, it is important to remind ourselves that those who are now in power because they have the guns. The Muslim Brotherhood, to the extent that they got some partial power, they got there through votes. Whether you like them or not, but that is how they got their position. They were able to mobilize votes. Now, it is no doubt that during that, or maybe starting even before the election of Morsi, but certainly after the election of Morsi, there's been a huge swing of public opinion against the Muslim Brothers. How far it has gone, we don't really know. There's a game of numbers. They say that they collected 22 million signatures to depose Morsi. Nobody has really questioned that, although it seems highly unlikely that anything like that number would be possible to collect signatures that fast. There's been a number going around saying that 30 million Egyptians demonstrated on the 30th of June, which is also completely not believable. So, but what we know is that obviously the demonstrations on 30th of June against Morsi were some of the biggest, maybe the biggest in the history of Egypt, and that there was a huge turn against the brothers. There was a criticism of them from some people for monopolizing power. There was a criticism from some others for doing neoliberal economic policies. There was a criticism for the brotherization, as it were, of the state, putting their own people in position. There was a criticism exactly for lack of reform of the police and for relying on a brutal police to counter demonstrations. So there were many reasons why people got dissatisfied with their rule, and there were, nothing seemed to be happening positively to the economic problems of Egypt. At the same time, along with these reasons why people changed, there was also a massive media campaign against the brothers, a clear campaign of demonization, where the brothers were blamed for everything that was wrong, and where a lot of economic resources were also mobilized to drive this campaign, which is obviously now has prepared the ground among large sections of the Egyptian populace to accept the bloody crackdown on the brothers. Now, how to understand developments in Egypt? Well, one important aspect of the contradictions that happened that developed in Egypt and the polarization is the question of democracy and elections. Because one of the results of the revolution were that you have these free elections that my colleague here, Shah Jahan, referred to. And some people won those elections. The Muslim Brothers got in those elections from 40% in the parliamentary elections down to 25% in the first round of the presidential elections, but then in the second round, 51%. But some people lost the elections. And so one important thing to notice is what was the strategy of those that lost the elections? Well, to make it short now, it's obvious that at one point they decided that how to get rid of the brothers in positions of power was not going to be beating them in the next elections, but was going to upset the whole game. Create a situation where the army will go in and remove the brothers. And that's a very fateful decision that the opposition made. Because it returns the country to the age-old principle that who controls political power is the one that is militarily strongest, which has hundreds of years of background in Egypt. And it has future consequences for future elections. Why would those that lose the next elections accept that those that win them should be sitting there for the 4 years until the next elections? Now, what's it a revolution in reverse? Well, to what extent there was a revolution in Egypt, a full-blown one, can be questioned now because we see the continued power of a military, a police, a judiciary, which has not been, and large sections of the business community that ruled under Mubarak and that has not been reformed or done away with. But it was a revolution in the sense that it was a democratic revolution. It opened up freedom, I mean, unprecedented freedoms, at least unprecedented since 1952, freedoms in Egypt to organize, to express your opinions. And despite problems with this under Morsi, but basically this was preserved until the end of Morsi. If you walk the Egyptian streets in, let's say, March of this year, as I did, or at least in May, you would find huge criticism of Morsi from all the newspapers lying on the streets you could buy. So this freedom still existed. And it was a very vulnerable some vulnerable steps in the direction of establishing at least a procedural democracy. On these 2 points, the revolution is now in reverse. There's been a clampdown on the freedom of expression and organization, because you cannot say anything else when you clamp down on, when you kill protesters and arrest political leaders. And there's been, for the moment, done away with the small tentative steps towards procedural democracy.
So my talk is called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, Egypt's Propaganda War. So I'm going to try to talk you through a couple of the major points, and I think this will tie in nicely to what the previous 2 presenters have given us. Okay, so the rebel campaign of 2013, as Björn Olof stated, claims to have collected 22 million signatures in order to get rid of President Morsi. And the claims were pretty clear: we don't want you, we don't trust you, and we think you're incompetent. This led to a counter-campaign from the Muslim Brotherhood supporters called Tagarrud, which means impartiality, which perhaps is not the most precise name, but it does rhyme with rebel in Arabic. So the idea here was also to collect signatures to state that, no, we want Morsi to continue, he's a democratic leader. So I'll try to talk you a little bit through the types of campaigns that we're witnessing and the type of propaganda war that we are witnessing. Because I believe that what's going on is not just clashes on the street, but we're also witnessing a really huge propaganda war, which might be as big in terms of effects. So first of all, there are 2 main frames, 2 main media frames that are going on in especially the Egyptian media, but also are being picked up by Western and international media. The Muslim Brotherhood narrative is that the Muslim Brotherhood are victims of a violent and planned persecution at the hands of the Egyptian military. The army are obviously the bad guys, and they have planned to get rid of Morsi from the very outset. The ousting of Morsi is a military coup, and the Tamarrud campaign and its supporters, the rebellion campaign, and its supporters have been played as fools. They were too naive, and they were just played. The military is authoritarian, and is basically a representative of all things evil and also of pre-Mubarak era, fulul. It's also highly undemocratic. In effect, the military involvement means that we are back to the pre-Mubarak days, back to the beginning of January 2011. The military coup is a derailing of the revolution. The Muslim Brotherhood are the heroes and the peaceful protectors of the revolution and democracy. Most importantly, the Muslim Brotherhood are framed as the only democratic force in the country. Morsi is framed as the first democratic president in Egypt ever, and his reinstatement is vital to reinsure Egypt's steady, if bumpy, road to democracy. In contrast, the military are autocratic and violent, and the proposed remedy is the reinstatement of President Morsi to save the revolution and the democracy. So that's one narrative. The other narrative is the military narrative, which is that the Brotherhood are the villains, the military are obviously the heroes. It is not a military coup, it is the will of the people. The army are simply protecting the will of the people, as we saw in the Tamarrud campaign. 22 million are obviously alleged to have signed the campaign. Morsi had absolutely no legitimacy amongst the people. It is the Muslim Brotherhood who derailed democracy through their authoritarian rule, controversial pushing through of contested constitution, and also their attempts to instate contentious ministers and to narrow the freedom of expression in Egypt, perhaps not by closing down all sorts of channels, but by making sure that a lot of people have no access to these channels, to publish in these channels. And also, they contend that Morsi was the first democratic president, and also they contend that he was democratically elected at all, because the presidential race itself was highly irregular. One example is taking in and out of candidates all the time, and that he ran against Shafi, who was put into the campaign at the very end of the debate. Sorry, at the very end of the election. So this is very contentious. The Muslim Brotherhood are framed as violent terrorists, willing to die, willing to sacrifice their blood, and they are willing to use violence themselves in order to create disruption and violence in the streets, forcing the military to crack down on them with violence as well. So that is the main narrative. So these two narratives are circulating in Egyptian media, on social media as well, and they're being discussed very abruptly. And you see all these pictures, and what I want to get across to you is that there are so many things that are not verified. There are so many things we do not know enough about. And one example is this slide here, where you've got propaganda war, this is the anti-Muslim Brotherhood side. So you've had stories about orphans being forced out in the streets into demonstrations where they are holding posters that say that their father died as a martyr, and the implication is that he was killed by the Egyptian military while they were demonstrating. And then the claims are that these children are orphans, they were taken out of the orphanage, their father was not killed in that way. You've also got circulation of very, very violent photographs of pictures of people who have been tortured allegedly at the Muslim Brotherhood's hands. So this is being circulated by those who oppose the Muslim Brotherhood. And on the other hand, you've got the other side, which is how this is a crackdown on democracy. Egypt's road to democracy is completely corrupted, and we see body counts. We see how many Muslim Brotherhood supporters have been killed all the time. There is definitely a propaganda war going on, and amongst the things that we do on this new Middle East blog, which is connected to the centre that Bjørn Olav is heading at the University of Oslo, several of us are writing about what's going on and trying to interpret what is going on. So I encourage you to look at that blog. I want to spend my last minutes just discussing this very last incidences, and I agree with Bjørn Olav, this is not a good morning. And the last scenes that I apologize for the horrible pictures on here, but I want to get some points across. So what I want to talk about is how a story is framed. This feeds into what is going on and the general propaganda war that is going on in Egypt. First of all, when I started to look at what happened yesterday, the reports that I looked at were very, very different in terms of how many people were killed, who was killed, was it the demonstrators, was it the police, was it military? And of course, everybody is saying that demonstrators from the Muslim Brotherhood got killed. There's no doubt about that. But there's huge contestation of the numbers. We've got things from 5 people, 40 people, some people claiming 2,000 demonstrators got killed. And this was all within a couple of minutes of the first incidences we heard in the morning. That is the first thing. The second thing is about most people are not contesting that the military has used violence in this situation, except for the military themselves, who are congratulating themselves on saying that they used a lot of restraint. So one of the things that I want to get across here is that these images tell a story, and these images are being used very actively. So on the one side, the anti-Muslim Brotherhood campaign in the media is showing pictures of police people who have been tortured at the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood is the main claim. And you see some horrible, horrible pictures, and this is not the first time we get this claim. On the other hand, we are seeing very obvious demonstrations of strength in the other pictures, where you see like this man who's lying there, and you see the military, the soldiers, a lot of force, and this guy is helpless. The other picture is you see bombs. You see that something is burning, you see tanks, and then you see a picture of Morsi sort of being crumpled, and it's a very powerful picture about who is in control and who are the victims here. So what I want to say is that the battle of the propaganda war is taking place several places, not just on the street, also in the media, and we have to, as researchers, I believe, we need to try to make sense of what's going on and try to make sure that we don't feed into just one of the perspectives. Thank you very much.
Before we move in, could we please ask people to, again, move into the middle so that the people sitting in the hard stairwells can perhaps get a soft seat instead? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about the Salafis, and in particular, I'm going to focus on the Noor Party, the biggest Salafi political party. Now, the Salafis have kept a relatively low profile during this time, so I think I should remind you of why they're important. They entered politics just after the revolution, and they got 25% of the votes. They have a large following in not only in Alexandria, but lots of cities and provinces across Egypt. So they're a big movement, and their voice matters. Now the question is, what have they done in this situation, and how have they justified what they've done? The Noor Party was increasingly critical of President Morsi and the Muslim Brothers throughout spring 2013. And soon after the coup, they came out and supported General Sisi's roadmap, which included the removal of Morsi as president. And this stance has defined their position in the Islamist camp for better or worse. It's meaningless, clearly, to talk about one Islamic bloc, like some people, including Islamists do, one Islamic bloc against secular forces in Egypt. It's clear that the political differences are more complicated than Islamists versus secularists. The Justice and Freedom Party of the Muslim Brothers, they have cut off contact with the Noor Party and the Salafis. And the Salafis have been, or the Noor Party, have been heavily criticized by other Islamists because they're seen to abandon their fellow Islamists in this struggle against the military. At the same time, the Noor Party have not ceased trying to establish contact with the Muslim Brothers and act as an intermediary between them and the other forces in Egypt. So they try to carve out a space, a third space for themselves between the Muslim Brothers and the liberal/secular camp. These efforts are still ongoing, with the Salafis, as of yesterday, heavily criticizing the brutal crackdown on the Muslim Brothers, while at the same time asking Islamist demonstrators to refrain from using violence, to refrain from attacking churches and Christians. Now, how have they justified their position? Like I said, other Islamists have criticized the Noor Party for not closing ranks with their fellow believers. And the argument is then couched in terms of a zero-sum game between defenders of Islam on the one hand and secular forces bent on weakening Islam's role in Egypt on the other hand. And Noor spokesmen, they don't accept this argument, and they insist on assuming a middle ground. Now, this can be interpreted either as uncertainty from new political players that are hesitant to take a position in the field, or it can be interpreted as a willingness to play a political game and make a gamble. I'm honestly not sure which to choose. But it is pretty obvious that the fear of alienating large segments of Egyptians defines the Noor Party stance. And what's interesting here is that this fear of alienating a large segment of Egyptians, that's the position of a pragmatic politician rather than a fervent religious ideologue. And that's the way we're used to thinking about Salafis, that they're fervent religious ideologists. Now, the most important counter-criticism Noor Party members have offered to the Muslim Brothers is that the Muslim Brothers monopolized power and narrowed their network of trust to just their own organization, so that all the other currents inevitably became suspicious of them and felt left out from any meaningful process. And this was where the talk of broaderization of the state came from. So here, the Salafis, the Noor Party, not known for their inclusive religious views, they assume the role as the more tolerant Islamic force in opposition to the Muslim Brothers, which are then portrayed as less inclusive. Interestingly, and I think this is very interesting, the Noor Party also field another argument, which has to do with democracy. And I read this on a Salafi website intended for a Salafi audience, written in Arabic, so it's not about posturing for a Western or secular audience. And on this website, a spokesman for the Noor Party said that if the Noor Party had supported Morsi with his arrogant behavior during the spring, this would have fueled the criticism of those who say that the Islamists just want to have elections once, then assume power, and then pull up the ladder and not give anyone else the possibility of participating. So that they would just use the mechanisms of democracy to end democracy. The Noor Party were afraid that this would be the result if they closed ranks with the Muslim Brothers. And this is interesting because it shows not only a sensitivity to what many ordinary Egyptians might think, but it's also a commitment to at least some democratic values. And it comes on a Salafi website. I think that's interesting. Now, of course, there are lots of tenets of Noor's program or policies that don't correspond well with democracy, but it's interesting that this one does. Now, what are the implications of Noor's positions? 3 short implications. I'll start with the very obvious, which is that there are serious differences between Islamists, and this really goes to show that once and for all that Islamism is not a monolithic ideological current that speaks with one voice. Secondly, it also shows that the Salafis have been able to juggle Salafism's strict theological tenets with the pragmatic necessities of day-to-day politics, or at least have been able to so far. And it seems then that they're there to stay on the political scene in Egypt. So Salafism has definitely entered politics. It remains to be seen whether they will continue to play an important role, but they're definitely going to stay, I think. And then there's an implication for Egypt. I wrote this the day before yesterday. I prepared this little presentation. Then I had written that the Salafi stance, which is supportive of Al-Azhar and independent Islamists and the secular establishment against the Muslim Brothers, this stance takes the country one step away from a much feared civil war, because the Salafis represent quite a lot of people who won't throw their weight behind a violent response to the military's coup. So when the Islamists are divided, and quite a large segment of them say that no, we don't want to take up arms against the coup, that's one step away from a bloody civil war. That's what I wrote 2 days ago. After the brutal crackdown yesterday, I think honestly that everything is up in the air. I think it's impossible to predict in the long run how the Salafis are going to react to this show of force by the military, because it simply was so appallingly brutal. This also goes to show, I think, that it's very, very difficult, or if not impossible, to predict anything about Egypt's future, because things can happen so swiftly and so drastically change the course of events that mostly anything can happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you first to all panelists for so elegantly sticking to the time. Then we have about 25 minutes of questions and answers. So if you can just give me a signal, I will try to accommodate all who would like to ask a question. And, of course, please, if you can also speak into the microphone, as I said at the start. Okay, we have a question back there. Hjelmen. If you could please also introduce yourself, please.
Hello, I am Abir Basuni from the Egyptian Embassy. I would like to thank all.
Is it on? Yeah, let's see if we can fix it.
I would like to thank all the speakers for their speeches, and I have to thank also the organizer because it is balanced a little bit, but I have comment. I mean, any removal or any break of any demonstration, it is brutal. And we witnessed this in Britain in 2011. We witnessed this in Wall Street. And there are, I mean, violence is not accepted in all cases, but sometimes you have to do it. Okay, there has been lots of violence inside the demonstration camps, and it wasn't, I mean, this situation cannot stay forever. It has waited for 2 months to be break down peacefully. There has been lots of mediation, internal and external, but it hasn't reached any solution. My comment is about, I mean, who defines Egypt? Who defines Egypt? This is really a very good, I mean, title for because it is Egyptian who defines Egypt. Okay, it is not. I mean, if we say it is a revolution, it is a revolution. And it's if you say it is a military coup, this is not what is it, because you didn't see it as a military coup when it happened in 2011, and you approve it like a revolution. So why now you change? Because of the change of interest, because of the change of a plan. That there is an international plan for Middle East that has been changed suddenly. The Egyptian people surprised all the world by a second revolution. It is not a coup because I mean, Egypt is not governed by military. It has not started by military. It is, as we see, it was a campaign, a civilian campaign which collected 22 million signatures against ex-President Morsi. It is not all the military coup conditions is not applied here, but the difference is the difference in interest. Okay, so we have to go back to legitimacy. What is legitimacy? And it has been almost in paradox with democracy. Okay, so we have. I mean, democracy is not.
I think we'll have to state your question, please.
Okay. My question is, what can the West, if this happened in a Western country, okay, can the West support what was going in a demonstration camp in their streets, or in while there is no monopoly of violence, of power? Because what was there? There was a martial training in the demonstration. There was guns. There was. So can any Western country support this situation inside their country without resolving the situation?
Thank you. We'll take another question at the first row here, please.
My name is Albrecht Hofans, and I teach Arabic at the University of Oslo. I have a good friend in Egypt with good connections to the police. Some of you know him now, who told me in October 2011 that the Muslim Brothers have betrayed the revolution. They have hijacked the revolution. They bet on a pact, on a deal with the military to gain power. This was a common discourse actually at the time. But he said they are blind, they are deluded, and they will see another 1954, which is when Nasser cracked down on the Muslim Brotherhood then, bloodily. And this was, as I said, October 2011, and this is what we are seeing now. Some people have said all along that the military never gave up power, that the military, has always controlled the ultimate reins of power, so they were not surprised by the developments at all. So my question is chiefly to Björn Olof, but anyone else who might want to comment here. Are the Muslim Brothers really that blind? Why did Morsi never do anything to rein in the security apparatus, to try to instigate a reform of the security apparatus, as was demanded by many sections of the left and liberal part of the revolutionaries? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question. It's up at the back, and then we'll give the panelists a chance to answer to the first round.
My name is Paul from Buskirk University, and my question goes to, sorry if I mispronounce your name, Dr. Buyan. Towards the end of your slide, you mentioned that the removal of the Muslim Brotherhood was by their own choice. And in reconciling this to what the second speaker talked about, that, and what we also know that it was by gun. So I'm wondering how to reconcile the two, how it was their choice, despite all their misgiving during the administration, but still I'm wondering if it was really by their own choice. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll give the panel a chance to reply, and we'll start with Dr. Shah Jahan, please.
Thank you. I think probably a little bit misunderstanding that one. I said in that slide that Muslim Brotherhood is excluded right now. That is to some extent in the political process, the current political process, that was there by choice. They said they are not going to include themselves in discussion with the interim government because, in their words, the interim government is an illegitimate government. So this is why they do not want to engage any kind of political process with the current interim government. That was the meaning of that slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Björn Olof, do you have something?
Yes. Well, first to, sorry, the lady who said that, if we, I think she meant Egyptians, if we say it's a revolution, it is a revolution. But then you need to tell us which Egyptians should we listen to, because some say it's a revolution, some say it's a counter-revolution. So it doesn't help us much. Sorry. And the thing that these were sort of armed terrorist camps, I think it's a very strange argument to make, looking at the facts. I'm sure in the days to come we will see pictures of weapons found in these camps, but it's an old method that was used all during the Mubarak time. And we're trying to portray the Muslim Brothers as terrorists. Even in the military courts at that time, they were never able to secure a single conviction for Muslim Brothers engaging in terrorism. Now, I'm not saying that under the current circumstances that there's not violence taking place on the part of the Muslim Brothers. There has been, and there will, and probably there will be. But if you crack down in that way, you make a military coup, you shoot people on several occasions during July, you shoot peaceful demonstrators, then someone makes a violent move, and then you say, there you see, they were violent all the time, that's why we had to depose them. This is not a very good argument. Now, I want to comment on Albrecht Hofheinz said here. And I've been using the summer to read about 1952 to 1954, and there are very many interesting parallels in how when the military made a coup in 1952 in Egypt, and how the different civilian forces, including the Muslim Brothers, maneuvered and sometimes allied with the military, sometimes went against them, and the whole power play ended, of course, with the military crushing down on everybody and taking the power. Many important lessons to be learned. I think, most importantly, this points to a very important fact, that the revolution against Mubarak was possible because, in a short historical moment, the whole civil society, or almost all of it, from the most radical leftists via liberals and nationalists to many of the most conservative Islamists, came together with some simple democratic demands. Then they were able to push the regime, also because there were internal cracks in the regime. That's another story. And also after Mubarak fell, on some occasions, they came together and they were able to pressure to gain new concessions. When they split, when one of them allies with the military against the others, or when the polarization, whether that's a result of that, their allies turn against them and then they ally with the military or whatever. But when they are split, they cannot move forward. It goes for the Muslim Brothers in power, who were able, for many reasons, some of their own making, some of the making of the opposition, they were able to isolate themselves. They did not have a force, and I think maybe that's a sort of a lame realization on their part that, oh, we have to postpone reforming the police and so on, because just now everybody is throwing stones at us, and so we have to keep peace with the police. Possibly that was the calculation. But it also, the same delusion, if a delusion it is, of course it has happened on the part of that part of the Tamarud campaign, which were original revolutionaries from 25th of January, who thought they could, by creating an impossible situation and give the military an argument to move in, so they could rescue the revolution. I think they will see that they have been deluded also.
Thank you. Mona?
Can I just add something, what you say? When your friend said that military will never give up their power, I think he is right in the sense that, in addition to what Professor Olaf said, mostly because of the business interest, because military controls about 40% of the total economy in Egypt. They are producing ammunition to foodstuff. So, and at least in 1994, they are the owner of 16 production institutions. It has increased multiple levels. So they will probably, and what they are trying to do, and they will continue to do, to expand their capacity, business capacity. They will never give up that one. And Egyptian society is now at such a stand. I think military has a role to play, and they will probably continue to play. Thank you.
Thank you. Mona?
Yeah, I'll just give a very brief comment. I think one of the things that is important to think of when we're discussing this is whether or not the military needs a coup to control their particular interests and whether they're interested in power. We're obviously seeing that the military is involved in ways that are not considered positive by the entire population. And my comment to Abid at the Egyptian embassy, I mean, I agree with you, Anulov, it depends on, that is kind of the point of the question, who defines Egypt. It's because of the different factions within Egypt. They are not speaking with one voice, and that's very, very obvious. And I think there's what goes on the street today and the next few days will also be assigned to the military in terms of whether or not they will continue to keep a huge portion of popular support. And it is more difficult. And I know tons of families where the family itself is divided. So this is part of, and you know, for those of us who are on social media all the time, we are seeing how the debates are getting very ugly and people are really becoming very much enemies of one another. So the point is whether the military also needs this type of power to control their interests, which are largely economic, but also that they don't want any critique of them in the media. And that red line has been there throughout the whole time with Morsi, so that has not changed. And there are questions about whether Morsi and the military struck a deal, but that the Brotherhood was had. So that's also part of. I mean, this is the kind of fruit. This is very fertile soil for lots of conspiratorial ideas and thoughts. And it's still, even though we think we understand what's going on, there are so many versions of what's going on that I think it's still difficult to determine exactly what is going on. That's my personal view.
Thank you. Jakob, do you have any comments?
No, not really.
Okay, then we'll take another round of questions. I will assure you that we'll try to finish at 1:45, because I know that people would like to go to work. But so.
Amal Wahab, I'm a journalist in Klassekampen. My question goes actually to all of you, because my heart is burning, for this is my home country too, as well as Norway is. So this is very, very difficult to talk about. My question is, why did not the Brotherhood and their political party use their own constitution, the constitution that they actually formed, that they voted through with no other forces than themselves, where the president had the opportunity to go to referendum and say, okay, there can be a difference regarding the numbers of people in the streets, whether they were 2 million, 10 million, 30 million. Actually, this is not the important part. The important part is that large fractions of the country were against Morsi. And my question is, why did he not go to a referendum? Shall we or shall we not have early election? Is it because the Brotherhood were so damn eager to control not only to have the political power that they gained in a democratic election, but also to get the 4 years in order to control the state institutions itself, and set the future rules of democracy in Egypt? Thank you.
You can pass it to the lady.
My name is Gerding Polden. I'm a TV documentary journalist. Long time worked in NRK, now freelance. My question is to the whole panel. Vice President Mohammed El Baradei resigned yesterday. How do you analyze that situation and the implication of that, or any hopes on that? And also, how do you analyze, you've spoken a lot about the Muslim Brotherhood on the one hand and the military on the other. What about the democratic forces on the left from the revolution? Are there any hopes there? And is the retirement of Baradei a hope or not?
Thanks.
Thank you very much. From Sudan Embassy, Australia. My question is for all of you, but this question just directed to Ms. Muna regarding about victims and casualties and the conflict of the numbers of them. Do you think, in the absence of independent investigation, I think just we would like, we're looking forward to see independent investigations in order to know the exact number of victims and casualties. And also regarding the framework of the resignation of Mr. Mohammed al-Baradei, that vice president, that responsible for the foreign affairs in the presidency. Just in the absence of him, now who will now the westernized man in the government, who will now just to reflect the foreign affairs in the current situation? And also in after these events, yesterday, what is the next now? And in the absence of the initiatives, many initiatives in the previous term, what is the next step for the time being? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll take one more question. Lady all way back at the back. I have seen 10 more hands, but I will take only one more question to respect the time. I'm sure the panelists will be able to also reply in private after this. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm Heidi Johansen from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We heard Jakob Høygaard saying that the El-Noor party has taken a pragmatic approach, which is maybe surprising. And I was wondering whether Jakob thinks that, that El-Noor has kept their popular support in this pragmatic approach, or lost to other less pragmatic Salafist forces.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll do the round in reverse this time. Jakob?
Okay, thanks. I'll begin with the last question because that was addressed specifically to me, and I think it's a very good question. Now, polls are very unreliable in Egypt, so and there have been no more than the parliamentary elections to go on. So it's really impossible to answer, although it's a crucial question, of course. That's why I said in the presentation that I'm not sure. I mean, they're there to stay on the political scene, but I'm not sure how big and important they will be, because it depends on them retaining their followers. It might be that the stance they have taken, criticizing the Muslim Brothers for attacking Christians, criticizing the Muslim Brothers for responding violently to state violence. It might be that some of their constituency don't like this and will turn away from them. It's really impossible to say at this time. So but it's a very pertinent point. So I'm glad you brought it up. Nevertheless, I think it's interesting that this party, which is largely made up of lay preachers and religious preachers, that they have so quickly taken such pragmatic stances, and regardless of what their constituency might think. I think that's interesting in itself. I'd like to comment just very briefly to Amal's question about why no referendum from Morsi. It's also a very good question, and I sympathize with your feelings here. I think it's difficult to talk about this as a foreigner, an outsider, when people's country is on the line. But I can't help thinking that there must be possible to have two thoughts in the head at the same time. I don't think it's far-fetched at all to believe that the Muslim Brothers would try to define democracy in their own way for 4 more years if they had the chance. They're not, a paragon of liberal politics. They've never been. If they had the chance, I'm sure they would try to tweak, the rules in a way that would suit them as best as possible, and that wouldn't necessarily be very liberal. So it was natural for Morsi just to, hold on and try to cling on to power and use it to their own advantage. I mean, they're not angels. At the same time, I think this sheer brutality of the military, which they have consistently showed, from 1954 and upwards, is quite appalling. And I must say, I'm a bit appalled at listening to reports and seeing reports of Egyptians standing next to the demonstrations that are being violently broken up and the live ammunition being fired, and they actually cheer the soldiers and congratulate them on killing these fellow Egyptians, which is really sad. So, and it surprises me that so many Egyptians seem so willing to run into the arms of the military, excluding some people on the far left, that is, and excluding Mohammed al-Baradei. Somebody else could comment on that, I'm sure.
Okay, I'll leave the rest of the panel for 1 brief minute for comments each, if you can, please. Shah Jahan, if you want to start, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. I think our friend from the Sudanese Embassy, you said after Baradei left the vice presidency, who can who is the westernized and who can run the foreign affairs. I think the most appropriate person would be here the current foreign minister, Nabil Fahmy, who is actually my colleague in the department. In addition to that one, he was the Egyptian ambassador in the US for 9 years, and actually he was even born in the US. So he has a very strong US connections. And as he's in the government, so probably he can tackle the situation. That is one. And then two of you asked about the Al-Baradais leaving the presidency, vice presidency. That is clearly shows the division in the government. So he himself said in his resignation that he does not want to put one drop of blood pouring on his hand of the decision that he is not a part of. So that clearly tells us that there is probably a division in the government. And it would be probably, we won't be surprised if more resignations are coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Mona.
Yeah, thanks. I have a couple of comments. I mean, one comment I think it pertains to that of the Al-Nur party, which I think is playing a very interesting role now, and it is even being cited by secularists in this propaganda war, which is, you know, a very interesting turn of events in itself. There's a really interesting change of constellations in terms of who's with whom, but there's also a lot of confusion. And what I was trying to illustrate why this propaganda war could perhaps explain a little bit why people, like you said, Jacob, are cheering on the military, because what they are seeing is extremely awful, torturing pictures, which they believe are being performed to people on their political side. So that makes the Muslim Brotherhood supporters into monsters, and therefore that is something that happens when you go into this kind of mode of tension and warlike situations. So I think that is part of the explanation. In terms of who is against what's going on, I mean, the divisions are quite clear. I mean, you've got perhaps the sort of glorified military narrative is slightly appeasing, but on the other hand, you still have, they talked about the first square, which was the sort of original revolutionary square, and then you had the second square, Tahrir, and then the second square, which was the pro-Morsi supporters, who believe themselves are the real revolutionaries. So this is also a debate about propaganda. And then you had a third square, which were the people who were against both the military and the Brotherhood. And in addition, there was a fourth square, but that was just a joke, and that was the people who are against the people who are against the people who are against. But that is just part of, we need some kind of comic relief in this situation, because it really is dire, and a lot of those of us who are personally involved are very upset about the whole thing. The other thing that I would like to get across is that the National Salvation Front have not been very happy with Baradei's resignation. They consider it, at least the so-called, what they've talked about to the media so far. And the other thing I'd like to get across is that a lot of people on the left side, even though some of them are very critical of the military, they believe that they don't really have an option now. They've forged this link. They need to try to convince them to do things in a different way, and they need to make the best of the situation, because the other option with the Muslim Brotherhood was not any better, perhaps worse. So this is part of the, I think that's, a little bit more than a minute, but...
Quite close. Bruno?
Yeah. Why didn't Morsi and the brothers call a referendum on whether there should be new elections? Well, I think that the Muslim Brothers, one discussion is whether they act wisely. Probably they should never have run for the presidency at all in the first place. And certainly there was an option that they could have called a referendum and got a way out which would preserve democracy in a better way. But this is one discussion. But there's another level which is very important. It is because probably the reason why they didn't is like politicians everywhere, they try to stick in power. Question is, did they try to stick in power abiding by the procedural rules? And I think until now, yes, they did. Because there was nothing forcing them to call a referendum according to the rules. And this thing about, yeah, the Muslim Brothers may have wanted to tweak the rules. Yes, of course, that might have happened. But has it happened? It's a very important discussion. At least we know that during the time that Morsi ruled, there was a lot of elections that the brothers lost in the journalist associations, in the student associations, and so on. This went on. They didn't use their force over the state to abolish those elections. Secondly, about Baradei. Baradei was probably, one explanation for it is that he was one of those being had. He went along with this thing and thought it could move smoothly towards a new democracy and so on, and now the military showed its hand, and then he doesn't want to be part of it, doesn't want to have this blood on his hands. I think about if there's any sort of people that have been with the coup that are now choosing another way. I mean, there's the extreme left, which is against the coup, which is a small group. Most others are probably, like I said, they're caught up in the game. We may be watching some centrist forces, which the Noor party is perhaps in this sense. The Misr al-Qawiya party of the Minim Abu Futuh, which is the former Islamist, also trying to move a kind of middle position. But it's a very different ground. Still, it's very extremely polarized. And I want to end on a very pessimistic note. My closest personal friend thinks, and he thinks loudly on Facebook, that the Ikhwan is, the Muslim Brothers are the devil. The other day he wrote that because someone had written that they are killers, they are Zionists, they are everything. So my friend wrote that, well, they are the devil, but they are not all kinds of devils, come on. And then he was immediately attacked by everybody. Are you supporting the Muslim Brothers now? So this shows to the extreme kind of demonization, which also opens the way for this cheering on of the shooting of demonstrators.
Right, so on that pessimistic note, I would like to thank the panel for their insightful comments today, and also thank you all for turning up, and I wish you all welcome back at another occasion, and a very good day. Thank you. We have a very token of our appreciation.
Thank you.